Night story. That was around 2016. I'm from a town in Santander called San Gil, but because of life circumstances during university, I studied at the National University. I ended up making friends with some guys from the coast, specifically one from Barranquilla, two from Cartagena, and one from a town called Mompox. This last one always talked about Holy Week in his town, saying it was an intense experience not only culturally but also spiritually, because you could really see and feel things during the events. My town has a beautiful Catholic tradition. It's lovely and I love spending Holy Week there. But the stories that my friend told us about Mompox intrigued me. That's how we ended up making plans almost overnight, and on a Holy Thursday we were already walking around Las Alboradas. Since we couldn't find any available hotels because everything was completely booked, we left our stuff at my friend's house while they showed me around. However, when we went back to get settled, because among other things the house was like a kind of hostel, my friend's mom, annoyed at him for not giving notice ahead of time, told us there was no way to accommodate us because all the rooms were full, but she had already talked to her sister to take us in. She said her sister had a big room with 3 beds and 2 hammocks. I immediately noticed my friend's unhappy face. I thought maybe he was embarrassed to take us somewhere not as nice and comfortable as his house. I told him, "Alright, no problem, as long as we can sleep, the rest doesn't matter." "That's the problem," said my friend, to which his mom widened her eyes, and he fell silent with an annoyed look. The house wasn't actually in the town itself but in a nearby hamlet, following the path along the river. It was like a cluster of wooden and brick houses among small farms. The biggest and nicest house was Julian's aunt's. I remember it had a spacious garden with many plants and flowers. It was a pleasant place despite the stifling heat, even in the shade. There I tried Coloso juice for the first time, a delight with no comparison, and not to mention the wine. Inside, the place was even more beautiful. You could tell it was an old house from many years ago. The decoration could easily be mistaken for a vintage photo, with huge vases, carved wooden frames, warm colors, wicker rocking chairs, flowers everywhere, a spectacle to the eyes. The house had 3 rooms. One huge one where we stayed, Julian's aunt's room, and the maid's room in the middle. We organized our stuff there and then returned to Mompox to see that day's procession and visit the churches, which are one of the town's main attractions. I remember being in the plaza of one church I liked the most, the one with the red facade, when a man approached us and told us that at midnight some Nazarenes who had already died gathered there, that he had seen them through a friend devoted to that tradition who had died years ago. The man said it happened on the night of Holy Thursday the previous year. That Holy Week, he had stopped attending processions, mass, and anything related to religious traditions because he was bitter about life and even about God, according to his own words, due to a business that had bankrupted him. That Holy Week, all he did with the little he had left was partying and drinking, even though the neighbors were upset with him. He said that night he went out drunk with a bottle in hand to look at the river, feeling a strange urge as if something told him to throw himself in, but suddenly he heard a voice, a greeting. It was someone familiar. He turned his head and saw the man crossing the street. He managed to see his face even in the dim light and recognized his deceased friend. He said he ran to see who it was because he couldn't believe he was seeing a ghost, but no matter how fast he ran, he couldn't catch up. He only saw him from behind, walking slowly without stopping, but never close enough. He ended up in front of the plaza of that church and saw a group of men in tunics. One of them turned toward him, uncovered his head, and motioned with his hands for him to come closer. It was his friend. He thought about going closer despite the drunkenness, but then he saw that the men there, about 7 or 8, weren't touching the ground, they were suspended in the air, levitating. He doesn't know how, but suddenly the effect of the alcohol disappeared completely. That's when he ran home and stayed locked inside until Easter Sunday. That was one of several stories I was told, and until that moment I thought they were just superstitions, things people believed happened but that had a logical explanation. That's what I thought and told my friends, who looked at me with mockery. Later, I understood why that time we came back late at night. It was almost 11, and the little town where we were sleeping had lost power. Only candles inside the houses were lit, with distant voices and the chirping of crickets, and an unbearable mosquito net that seemed to have a predilection for foreign blood, because the guys were happier on the way and I was jumping to shake off the insects sticking to my feet. We got to the house and the lady had saved us some food. Since there was no light, we sat at the garden table, which looked bright white by the moonlight. Then Julian started saying, "Look at the little house across the street. It belonged to a man who died many years ago, and the children only come occasionally because they haven't been able to sell it. Pay attention." Later on, we looked at each other, confused about what was supposed to happen. We kept eating and talking about different things when suddenly a small flash of light caught our attention. We saw a candle lit inside the supposed abandoned house and the shadow of someone standing in front of the window, looking toward the street. I said to Julian, "Now you're going to tell me that's a ghost." "If you want, go check it out to see there's no one inside," he replied. "But every Holy Week that candle is lit and you see a person." Still skeptical, I stood up, walked to the street and waved at the person in the house across the street, but they didn't even acknowledge me. I just saw their shadow standing still and the candlelight getting dimmer until it went out completely. At the end, I did get a little scared and decided it was better to go inside and sleep. That night we passed quietly. I can't say the same about Good Friday night. The atmosphere in that place afternoon on Good Friday is very strange. Everything seems immersed in a sepulchral stillness. Even the river seems to try not to make noise, the trees don't move, and you constantly feel a heavy presence anywhere you go that day. We went back earlier that day because Julian said the way back on Good Friday is to be respected, and being out late there was risking an encounter with an apparition, as they say. I remember that when we were about to enter the house, he asked if I wanted to see the little house across the street, the abandoned one, to see that no one lived there. I said, "Okay, since we're not going to do anything else." We entered. The door was only held shut by a hook. It was a small house but well laid out with a living room, kitchen, and 2 rooms. Everything was covered with sheets that clearly hadn't been moved for a while because dust and cobwebs dominated the place. "See, there's no one here," he said. I looked around with some distrust because it felt weird to walk inside. It was like someone was behind you all the time. I remember seeing a candle on a little table with a blackened tip and half-melted body. It was on a small, curious metal candlestick resting on the only table without a sheet on it. Next to the candle was a black and white photo of a man. Julian told me that was the old owner of the house, the elderly man who had already died. I don't know how to explain it, but I remember grabbing that photo and feeling a strange chill running through my body, like when you're about to faint and your body seems to lose all energy. I quickly put the photo back where it was and hurried toward the door. Outside, Julian was adjusting the hook to close it. We felt something fall inside the house like a metal glass. He called us, "Hey, come see." The candlestick was on the floor, and the candle was lying next to it, releasing a thin thread of smoke from its tip, as if it had just been put out. That's when we really got scared. We ran out of there and locked ourselves inside the house. Night came almost suddenly because we were quietly talking in the patio when suddenly everything clouded over and darkened very quickly, around 7 p.m. Everything was dim and silent, as if it were the early hours of the morning. The lady, Julian's aunt, who had spent the whole day burning smoke sticks in the house, had the doors closed since 6, and from the living room, you could hear her prayers. Around 9, the power went out again in the town. The music playing far away disappeared along with the scattered lights across the river. We had no choice but to lock ourselves in the room, lie down on the hammocks and start telling stories. By 11, everyone was asleep except me, who had a strange pressure on my chest that made it hard to breathe. Also, the heat was so stifling and intense that I didn't feel comfortable in the hammock. I felt like I was swimming in a river of sweat and mosquitoes. I don't know how the others managed to sleep so deeply and peacefully under those conditions. I couldn't take it anymore and went to the living room, opened the window facing the street and put a rocking chair there. At least I could feel some breeze. I lay back with a pillow, rested my feet on the window frame and closed my eyes. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard a strange sound like a whip crack. It was a strong blow. I had the impression it came from behind me like the kitchen. I didn't pay attention and settled back down to sleep. But just when I was drifting off again, the whip crack sounded again. This time there were 3, one after another, as if someone was being hit. Soon after, the worst began. The blows became more frequent, and after each crack, there was a slow cry, like when you try to hold in pain but can't. At that moment, I got up from the rocker, closed the windows and stood in the middle of the living room listening carefully. They were one after another, and each time the cries got louder. It was a man complaining horribly as if dying. I couldn't bring myself to look out. I ran to the room and woke the guys up, telling them something was happening. None of them paid attention, telling me to go back to sleep. They said it was surely a ghost. After a while, around 1 a.m., the blows stopped, but there was a small moan, like when someone finally rests from great pain. I tried to ignore it and managed to fall asleep. Almost dawn, Julian woke me up around 10 a.m. Everyone had eaten breakfast and gotten ready to leave. When I showered and went to the dining room, I found them all teasing me, asking if I was scared, if something grabbed my foot, or if a witch had appeared to me. Then Julian's aunt, alarmed, asked me, "How did they scare you? What happened?" When I explained what I heard, she was stunned, her expression changed immediately. Then she explained what was happening. She said her late husband used to self-flagellate on Good Fridays because of a vow he was paying off, which she never agreed with. He would always get up at night while she was sleeping to fulfill his supposed penance. She said when the blows and cries woke her, it was already too late. He was practically dying, crying in pain in the patio, his back covered in blood. One Good Friday she simply found him dead on the patio floor with the whip in his hand. After her husband's death, something happened that she never told anyone because she thought they would think she was crazy. But every Good Friday she hears the whip cracks in the patio, and she is the only one who hears them because people have stayed there every Holy Week and nothing has ever happened, until the day I also heard it. I remember all the guys had frightened faces, even Julian himself, who knew the story about his uncle but didn't know his aunt lived through torment every Holy Week. That I also heard it is what intrigues me the most. I had no connection to that story. I thought maybe I'm a very sensitive person to those kinds of things, or that maybe that day, when I grabbed the photo of the deceased man from the house across the street, I opened myself to those paranormal experiences,